This is the OGM weekly check-in call for Thursday, November 10th, 2022, just after the US midterm elections, which were not a red wave as had been forecast awfully and turned out to be something much milder and more interesting.
So Stephen Colbert called it a pink trickle.
The pink trickle. Yeah.
It sounds like a kind of disease, actually.
There were other formulations that I won't go into.
I know. I was thinking more sex toy, but still.
Other women have called it spotting, like a menstrual.
Oh,
that's what I wasn't going to say, TR.
I was wondering if that. So I thought maybe a woman needed to say it.
Thank you very much.
I myself.
I think that's a beautiful way to break into this group. So our normal habit on alternate Thursdays is to just go, I look at my little Zoom layout, try to remember who didn't get to go the week before and start with them, and then just go around and ask people to check in on what's happening in their lives that is sort of OGM-y, Open Global Mindy, which is about creating a shared memory for humans. I'm in a hotel near Tahoe. I hesitate to say its name because it's still called the Squaw Creek Resort, even though the word squaw has been sort of deprecated from the language, and the valley has been renamed, and the resort is now called Pinnacle Lodge, I think. But the names on everything's still here. Here because this week is the Linux Foundation's membership summit, which means it's the sponsors of Linux Foundation who are here. And I've learned what an OSPO is. It's an open source project office, or program office rather. And so these large corporations like Amazon and very big companies you would all recognize have offices that are the holding sponsors for open source within and across their enterprises. And they're here in lots of interesting ways, listening to talks and talking to each other. There's all sorts of good hallway banter. And I'm learning and absorbing a whole bunch about how this world works. And I'm here because on Tuesday, April gave a speech about flux mindset and change and all that. Normally they don't have non-technical, non-on-topic speakers at all. And she was sort of the exception this meeting around, and it worked really well. It's been really fun. And then Brian Behlendorf, a really old friend from long ago, he is not that old, is here and is sort of the part of the heart of the Linux Foundation and crew. And he runs something called OpenSSF, which is one of the major issues here is open software supply chain security. And that was a lot of words, but basically, how does the industry guarantee or at least improve the vulnerabilities across open source in all its different ways? And it's really, really interesting because there's a huge joint vested interest in getting security better. If you look at any of the data breaches or malware, ransomware episodes, or other kinds of things that have happened over the last couple of years, Eric has the perfect solution in the chat, which is just let Microsoft scan all your code. So Eric, I love that because I used to be a technology industry trends analyst, and I was always boggled. It boggled me for years that if you bought yourself a PC with Microsoft Windows or MS-DOS on it, you sort of couldn't really run it unless you bought software from 3 other vendors and installed it. You needed memory management, networking, and security. You needed some kind of software antivirus, right? And unless you did that, you didn't actually sort of have a functioning PC unless you were going to do the dumbest possible things. And I couldn't understand how anybody could ship a computer that did that. Sorry, that was, and I think what they were doing was seeding a marketplace for third-party vendors, and it was good for those other companies, which got big, but it always just boggled me that you couldn't just turn the thing on and start working. Did anybody else feel that during that era?
I thought it was cool, but that's because I like overly complicated things. Neil Stevenson, in his essay from long ago, in the beginning with the command line, talks about the difference between open source software, Linux, and closed source software like Microsoft. Microsoft has to pretend that everything works really well, so they'll never admit that it's buggy as hell. Linux, on the other hand, is like, dude, if you want to fix something, that would be great. So they keep a list of bugs, and they'll tell you everything about how it's bad. So it's kind of the same thing. Microsoft, it was always hard for Microsoft to like build enough parts of itself to make it whole.
I love, there was a time years ago where Steve Ballmer gave a speech. He said, I have figured out Linux or open source. I don't remember which one he was targeting. And he was like, we looked and saw who contributes to the code base. And it turns out there are tens of thousands of people who did nothing. They came in, they downloaded the software, they did nothing. And it's just this core bit of contributors who did all the changes to the code or whatever. And he's describing the mechanism that's like a mortal threat to Microsoft in complete ignorance of how it works and why it would work. And I was just boggled that he could be so checked out on what was like how that might be a good thing, how that dynamic might work. It's a crazy talk.
Ballmer also thought the iPhone was a stupid idea. And he also did the monkey dance.
There is the monkey dance.
there's
The monkey dance I sort of appreciate. I mean, he comes out on stage and works up a sweat, loving developers. And I gotta say, Ballmer basically blackmailing developers is what made Microsoft a monopolist and got them an antitrust case. So that kind of worked.
Yeah, I like Ballmer even less than I like Gates. I was in a focus group years ago that turned out to be about open source. This is like, must have been 30 years ago or something like that. And it was really striking that, I mean, people were concerned about security, and 8 out of 9 people said they would much more trust open source than Microsoft. Back early, that was really
Early.
we ran the Arts of Peace on CPM, old CompuPro, venerable CompuPro boxes, and then when the IBM PC came out, we shifted to that for I think about 6 months, and then the Mac came out, and we shifted to that and never looked back. And directly experienced the total cost of operation in the face of much higher hardware. It's like night and day. And that's where I've lived ever since, except for my time at City of Palo Alto, where I had to go Windows because that's what everybody was running on. And it was probably the most awful tech experience of my life. Not only the personal adjustment to everything having to be backwards and upside down, but the productivity loss was stunning. And even more stunning was all the crap that people took for granted as this is normal for computers, having not seen anything else.
Yeah, thanks, Gil. 2 slides that were memorable in the last couple of days, and then I'll go to Pete. And one of them sort of picks up what Pete put in the chat. One slide was, and one part of a presenter's talk was basically, hey, I've got this cool open source application, and it just requires you to go install this module and this module and this module and this module and this module. And you're not exactly sure that all those modules are clean, right? There's sort of chain of dependencies, and if you got something wrong, there might be a weakness in there. And that's just kind of how a lot of open source projects work, because everybody's not writing everything. They're sort of including a lot of code from other places. And then the other one was a speaker who said, hey, the software industry seems to be blaming the victim here on computer security. We're asking people who really have no idea what the vulnerabilities are to do a bunch of things that are sometimes quite arcane, and out of their purview or understanding, and then we blame them for not having patched the whatever when something breaks. And so they were trying to do this concept of security by default, like how do you build the system so that it's just secure as you run out the door. And then my apologies for this long geeky digression, and I think I'm checking in, which is unusual at the start of the call, and we'll get back to our check-in when Pete's done.
Since we hit Ballmer's Microsoft's cluelessness via Ballmer of open source, I wanted to maybe go back to a small story I had, Jerry, about composability and interoperability. And I apologize again to kind of keep going on the geek thing, but it's an interesting concept and a really useful concept that kind of comes from software, but you can also think of it like Legos. So one of the cool things about software is people figured out that you could build a purpose-built thing, like custom carve a wood thing that fit a purpose, or you could start to make building blocks like Legos, and that was called composability. And then once you've got one brick built, and in this metaphor, the bricks aren't all the same. They do different things. It's not like just regular Legos. It's the fancy Legos. once you've built one piece that does something really well, then you can use it in another thing with very little customization. So that composability is a big part of software productivity and architecture and things like that. So Jerry and I kind of realized in a call earlier this week that there's another thing called interoperability. If I wanted, I want my mailing program to work with my text editing program, and I want it to work with my word processing program and my mail merge program and things like that. So that's, if you think about it, that kind of thing where this piece of software plugs into a bunch of other pieces of software, other systems. That's in a way composability. So Jerry asked a really interesting question: what's the difference between interoperability and composability? So it's an easy answer, it turns out. Composability is when you're inside a system, and then interoperability is when you're intra-system, you're composing systems. So then Jerry made a really quick flash. He's like, okay, so if you draw the system circle in a bigger place, you've got composability rather than interoperability. You've just turned interoperability into composability. So that redrawing where the system goes thing led me to an interesting story I know about Microsoft right now. Microsoft at this point is not at all clueless about open source, and it looks like they have figured out a way, whether intentionally or just stochastically, they figured out a way to enclose open source while still playing by all the open source rules. So the trick here is that a reasonably sized open source system is composed of lots of little smaller pieces. And then an open source tool set is also kind of the same. It's lots of little pieces. So if you play the game such that for each piece, you're making sure that you do open source stuff, you follow the rules of open source. And Microsoft has been doing this. They've been releasing these really good development tools under open source. And everyone goes, well, should we be using Microsoft thing? And it's like, dude, they followed all the rules. It's open source. We can take this, we can do different stuff with it. It's wonderful. Microsoft has become a good player in the open source environment. It turns out that each tool is open source, but when you compose them together into a tool suite that you want to be using in your development environment, Microsoft can do a thing where they, in one sense, you compose a bunch of things together. You've got a system that's all open source. They kind of do a trick where if you want to use, our code editor in certain ways, if you want it to plug in with certain things, you have to actually move to a different licensing model. So you get hooked by using an open source tool, and then the rules change when you want to compose with other closed source tools. So in a way, what's happened is Microsoft has said, sure, let's draw a circle around this composability, and we'll call that open source. And we're going to draw another thing that's similar but different. And if you want to use one of our important tools, all of a sudden the open source thing that you're using has switched from being part of an open source composition to a enterprise closed source paywall thing. And this seems like it could be a really big deal because it's not just small tools that Microsoft is kind of either creating or buying. It's really big tools. So GitHub is has been an oasis for open source projects for many, many years. It's a commercial company, but the way they set up the company, the founders set up the company so that it activated the potential of open source in a really generative way. Microsoft up and bought it recently. So now they can kind of keep shifting what is open source and continue to keep components open source while they're doing an enclosure move by this composition thing over large swaths of it. So and it's hard to see because for decades we've kind of thought, all open source developers have this litmus test. Is this really open source? Did they use the right kind of license? I can't use it unless. We still reflexively apply those tests, but very few people are looking at that large composition thing that Microsoft is doing that's changing open source and enclosing it.
Pete, thank
Thanks.
you. Thanks very much. Anyone else with final geeky thoughts on the geeky questions, which are like really fascinating? Those have been great conversations this week, Pete. Go ahead, Doug. You're muted. There.
Yeah, out of the technology realm, but patterns. So I'm in the middle of Southwest Michigan farm country. So a farmer today cannot buy a tractor and work on it. And if that tractor, if there's an agenda John Deere has, that tractor can be effectively immobilized and the farmer can't do anything about it. If a farmer is looking to buy seed and he's got the big boys as supplier, contractually locked in and all the rest, and right next door is another farmer who's organic, who's NGO, who's like, looking to do something different. But seeds grow plants that are exposed to wind that carry other seeds. And all of a sudden, the corporate proprietary patented seeds are now showing up on that farmer's land, and he's subject to effectively unlicensed use of seeds that he never bought or asked for, but that happened to be showing up in his field. And it's sort of the same territory in terms of boundaries of proprietary and ownership, projection of control, power, authority, right? Growing, expanding, and on a global basis, everybody's aware of the monopolization of food. Like that's sort of the agenda, which is all crops everywhere are proprietary from proprietary seed. So it's sort of a really interesting, I don't know whether it's an inflection point or turning point, because I'm not sure there's any way of stopping it. Like you tip that line you just described, Pete, and all of a sudden you just fell into, okay, everything I've got, I got to pay up. And there's no alternatives to turn to because they're buying where all the alternatives are housed. And they're presumably going to be infected with the same triggers and implants. It's, yeah.
Doug, thank you. I've got a thought in my brain called The Hidden War on Small Farms, which covers the topics that you're talking about and sort of tries to dive into them in some way. Let me just go Carl and Gil on the same question.
Yeah, just triggering a lot of things going back to 2003. We had a big government conference. There was a guy, George Thomas, unfortunately he passed from cancer at the age of 53, but he came up with he was our enterprise architect, and he had just moved over to HHS to be their enterprise architect. So he would have been involved in the healthcare.gov thing. We would have had we wouldn't have had that fiasco. But sidetrack. But he came up with this open source, this OSERA thing, and then that eGov conference too. There was a lot of interesting things going on there. Some things that I wouldn't want to have recorded. So I'll have to talk about it.
Thanks, Carl.
At some point.
Gil?
Yeah, just real quick to what Doug said about Monsanto. The companies effectively doing this. In fact, Monsanto sued farmers for theft of intellectual property that resulted from the drift of Monsanto genetic material onto the farmers' farms. I don't know what happened with that. Ken, you may know, since I think you've been tracking that. I always thought that the farmers should have been suing Monsanto for criminal trespass. because they could no longer sell their crops as organic because Monsanto, I keep conflating Monsanto and Microsoft. I wonder why that is. Their stuff kept invading their genomes, which recalls, and Jerry, I hope you have this in your brain, Robert Vanden Bosch, former emeritus professor at Cal, entomologist, I think, used to talk about the right to biochemical privacy. And it laid the basis for which I think is still a pending area in the law for someone to say, you have the right to operate your company the way you do within regulations, but you don't have the right to put your chemistry in my body without my permission. It's trespass. And
So
I'm still waiting for some lawyers to take that one on in a big way.
yeah, exactly. So Monsanto Canada versus Schmeisser is one of the cases involved there. And I do have Vanden Bosch in my brain, but only about the pesticide treadmill and the pesticide mafia.
Yeah.
Basically, which is some of his work.
Yeah, look for biochemical privacy, see what you find.
Cool, thank you. Oh, good. And Pete already put Monsanto versus Schmeisser in the chat. Just noticed it. Carl, did you want to come back in, or do you want to lower your hand? Okay.
Yeah, just, well, I'll post something later too, but I've my social networking project, I've got one it's happening hours for the holidays, and I'll be looking to do some things the last 2 weeks of the year.
Cool, thank you. And when you check in, that's probably a good thing to go to. Let me see who I have in the queue, which I've lost. Ken, Doug, Carmichael, Tulara.
Hello, everybody. First of all, fucking news just really pisses me off with all their, oh, the Republicans had this red wave. And if people hadn't been inundated with that for the last couple of months, I wonder if the outcome of the elections might have been quite different. More people might have shown up. But that said, I'm extremely happy with what went down. Yes, it's very dicey in terms of who's going to win control of the House and Senate, but there were so many state elections where they flipped the chambers in Michigan. Gil sent out a thing yesterday from our mutual friend listing all these amazing things that happened in this election. So a lot to celebrate, a lot to be grateful for. Coming up on Thanksgiving, I know that on Thanksgiving I am going to be saying thank you to all the people who got out there and did their hard work to make this election not the slaughter we were expecting. I'm really grateful about that. It's amazing how these conversations drift from, open source software to Monsanto to open seeds and whatnot. It's one of the things I really appreciate about this this space is the variety of what goes on here. What am I doing that's OGME? The county of Marin spent $175,000 on an economic value strategic plan. And it has 5 areas of recommendation, 5 flagship initiatives. And the language is the wimpiest stuff you've ever seen. Like, seek to make more economic opportunities available to marginalized communities. What the hell does that mean? I mean, that's just, I can't believe that they spent all this money to have somebody say these really mushy goals, with no direct actions. So I'm working with someone Gil knows, Chris Yolonis, who runs VenturePad, which is our co-working space downtown, on combining 2 of the initiatives into something really practical. Marin County is really trying to electrify. So we said, well, what if we were to tackle electrifying all of the commercial buildings, anything more than 10,000 square feet, and any apartment building that had more than 10 units? Could we pull together vendors and community players and property managers and property owners to create a kind of a consortium where, sort of a diamond certified thing of, if you come to this consortium, they will take you from start to finish, handle everything for you, make sure you get, the best service and the lowest prices. So that's what's, I'm trying to put this together. There are jurisdictions doing that. Tell them to stop being with. So we're trying to put together a little project to get this off the ground sometime in Q1 or Q2 of 2024. That's the most OGME thing I'm actually working on. Other than that, continuing to read and just did this big project of cataloging all these books I'd read, and I'm now up to almost 600, which kind of blows my mind. And I as I was doing it, I thought I'll put a column in for decade red. And I didn't realize it when I did that, but once I sorted by decade red, I saw all these patterns jump out of this is what I was reading as a kid, as a teenager, as 20 something, 30 something. And I get fixated on something. Like I want to know something. I'll just go off and read 10 books about it, you know. So it's really interesting to see how that panned out. And just it was a fun little project, kept me busy for a couple days. Now I need something else. So anyway, that's me. Good to see you all. Hope you're doing well.
Thanks, Ken. Let's go Doug Carmichael to Laura Carl.
So 3 things on my mind, and I'm going to start with Ken's view about this project in Marin. If I understand it properly, it's impossible to do that project without emitting a lot of CO2 in one way or another. And I'm continually puzzled as to why we don't draw logical conclusions from facts like that. Second thing on my mind, watching the returns on the elections, I became really bored and puzzled by the fact that the only thing that was mentioned basically was numbers. How many votes does this person have? How many votes does that person have? No content about any of their positions. It just seemed like numerical fetishism all the way. And of course, the other numerical line was the number of dollars spent in a campaign. So that basically was the whole discussion. And we're hanging there on pins and needles, looking at how exciting this is when we know that by tomorrow, we're just going to have the facts and all this is totally wasted energy. So I thought, what if we had a week, a voting week, during which the commentators would talk about what is on the minds and the positions of the various people running. Meanwhile, people could go vote whenever they want, and the results are announced, the numerical results, only at the end of the last day of the voting week. So the whole discussion would be about things to do, what needs to be done, how people are approaching it. Next thing on my mind is watching COP27. There's no question but what the urgency has really increased from COP26. The language is more visceral, it's more frightened, it's more urgent. But with all of the talk, the word for COP27 this year is implementation. But nobody talks about implementation because nobody knows how to do it. So we're stuck. So it leads me to the thought, which I wouldn't do in most places, but I think this is a safe environment to do it. And that is, since we're not going to be able to do much about climate change, temperature is going to rise. The question has to be on our minds, how do we die and when? So I'll stop with that.
I thought you were going to go to deep adaptation, but that's a bit a bit darker, Doug. How do we die and when, I got to say. I remember Vinay Gupta many years ago wrote a piece called There Are 6 Ways to Die, which I don't know why somebody hadn't written it before, but basically you starve to death, old age, disease, murder, and I don't remember what the other ones were. And it was a pretty good list. It was like, oh, okay, that seems like a list. Do you want to say a little bit more about that, Doug?
Well, no, I'm going to just stop. Well, maybe I'll say one more thing, and that is I've been reading a history of, everybody should watch the Yale lectures by Tim Snyder on the history of Ukraine. He's running the course online and live, and they're recorded so you can go on later. And they are really extraordinary because the Ukraine falls apart and comes together and falls apart in ways that are not unlike our current world situation. And it's worth reading. And what you get is, of course, things like the starvation of 10 million people. The whole scale is so different than what we're used to. But I think a factor of modern life is that the scale of things is hidden from us.
Thanks, Ted. Let's go to Lara, Carl, Eric. And welcome to Lara.
Thank you. Doug, thank you for your question of how do we die. A couple of months ago, I had the insight that I wanted to start a business on helping people die with dignity or a good death, because ultimately we're all going to do that. And how, and in our society, certainly anything that ripples out from the UK, we don't really want to talk about anything uncomfortable. So going right into that story and how to have a good death, I think would be a really wonderful, courageous move to get people to show up and learn how to be authentic with it. However, that wasn't what I was going to talk about today, but I love that you ended your piece with that. And it gave me the opportunity to play with that idea. I'm currently working on a project with someone who comes out of Europe in human resources. And there are many books written on narcissism in terms of a relationship between two people. But in the HR departments of Europe, they are seeing the management style of narcissism, and they're able to plot the patterns of that. And as I sat and listened to your stories this morning about technology, and was a little overwhelmed because that's not my field, I was thinking there are certainly patterns that are visible here that we should be addressing, because the narcissist basically
AI to robotics to virtually every sector of the economy.
Sorry, that was John's accidental video playing. I just muted him. Hi, John.
Okay. There are certainly patterns where there is absolutely no relational attunement to the other. The needs of the other are completely ignored, and the push goes forward serving the narcissist's needs through the lies and disinformation. And so that they continue to gather more and more power, whether that's financial or political influence, or just influence within the area that they are. So I think it's really important that we start looking at those patterns and we start giving institutions tools to deal with this, because whenever you start to address that dysfunction in an institution, people just back off because they have the safety of not being responsible for that piece. And that's how we're losing, you know, how we're getting this disparity of power on so many levels, where, you know, we used to send the aggressive masculine off to war because the other was the problem, and they would all gang up and try and, well, our other is within now. And we seem incapable of addressing attack from inside. And I don't know if it's because we choose to be numb, because we don't actually want to say this is what the problem is, or if we're just happy letting it be somebody else's problem. But we've let it be somebody else's problem for so long, it's all of our problem now. So I will sign off with that.
Thank you, Talara. Can you say a little bit more about narcissism kind of in the way you intend it in here? Like there's for me, that just, you just opened up like an onion of different kinds of topics and ideas. And I want to listen more with more care to where you're aiming, what you were saying.
Okay, and I do want to be careful about using that term, because that term can be so overused. So we may want to actually use a more psychologically accurate term, which is psychopathy, because it includes more aspects of it. And it is, these people, there are dark narcissists who actually have some wisdom of empathy, and they will use their skills of empathy against others intentionally. Then there are the narcissists or the psychopaths who simply have no somatic knowledge, and they are so disembodied that they work operationally from the mind, pushing forward to gain their agenda. And what they're actually doing is they're working actively at that so that their soma, their body wisdom, is not activated, because can't be activated because they're so dissociated and so in the intellectual piece. And so inside them, their soma and their intellect are constantly in conflict. Their soma has to fight. And they're unconscious that the body has to fight, and the brain is the coping mechanism of doing that. And so there is no room for other in that. And so, you know, unfortunately in capitalism, the more money and power and control that you can have over your domain, the more likely this behavior occurs, whether it's John Deere trying to, you know, control every aspect of what a farmer does with their tractor, or whether it's Monsanto with their seeds, or Bill Gates, you know, with Microsoft. All of these pieces are silos of power. And I guess the other reason I came on today is I've been following your thread on Bitcoin, and I'm looking at what's happening there. And I'm looking at the time frame between World War I and World War II, how different industries, mostly in the US, but certainly globally, really spiked, and how the wealth was created in these silos. And yet, if we go back into history now, those industries simply don't exist anymore. They're just gone. They fell. And so I've had a curiosity. This may seem a bit abstract, and I'm going all over. I've had a real curiosity of what it might have felt like to live in London when the Germans, during the Blitz, and waking up in the morning and walking to the building next door that was bombed out, but you were asleep and you actually survived. And I feel like there's a lot of that going on in our economic system, and whether it's Bitcoin gone or what, you know, whatever, I feel like there are pieces being set up to be taken out of our system. And then it will be curious how our system recovers. So that's me coming from a non-American perspective. Like I get this conversation as mostly American centric, but I'm looking more at a global perspective, the European economy. Yes, we did talk about the Ukraine, but what pieces of the world are going to be part of this recovery as pieces of the American economy simply disappear?
Simply fail. I talk sometimes about the sword of Damocles hanging over workers, where automation or outsourcing or whatever is just going to wipe people out, and they're not going to have much recourse afterward. And there's no sense in most places, I think, and this is just conjecture, or the feeling I have, there's no sense of collaboration with management to try to use automation to get productivity, to keep everybody employed and make the thing work better. There's a sense of, oh my gosh, not so much randomly, but I could be, you know, me and my livelihood, we could be wiped out at any moment randomly. And then outside of that, there's this random thing of nature seems to be striking more and more viciously. And then other sorts of things are happening with random school shootings or mall attacks or other kinds of violence that are happening randomly. So it feels like we're living in a stochastically dangerous world, at least in our heads. Now, a lot of people will say that, gosh, it's safer now than it was when the Huns wouldn't come over the hill and wipe out your whole village. And there's a bunch of people who say, hey, look, things are getting better, and point to sort of long-term stats. But boy, it feels just stochastically kind of crazy. And then if you mix that back in with the malignant narcissists that you were talking about, who are sort of sometimes in charge of the controls in there, it's a little scary. Anyone else with thoughts on this? If not, let's go Carl, Eric, Doug B.
Funny with that last thing, because well, one of the things that working at the General Services Administration, I'm right at we really are at the center of so much many things that, like, I posted a link to Sean Armstrong. He actually presented back in August. We have a building sustainability network, and you definitely need to check that out, Doug Carmichael, because he's talking about decarbonization and slides. The slide, like 6 really core strategic leverage points, and then like 2 of them are highlighted. Like, these are the 2 most, I mean, this guy is just laser. I mean, he's really impressive, that Redwood Energy. And then my master's program at George Mason, we have these learning community days, and one back in August, there was they'd actually brought in Professor Donna Hicks, and she actually, you'll have to check that out in particular. Is it Tylara or Tylara? How do you? Yeah, because she was, it's all about conflict resolution, but it was like the dignity was really dignity, violating dignity was what they kind of came up with as the term and stuff. And she worked with Desmond Tutu on stuff too. So definitely an amazing speaker, and I posted a link to her book there. But as I said, that's one of the things that really keeps that just how interconnected this group is with, and can do a similar type thing. So the idea I mentioned before is I have ideas for happening hours for the holidays, and it's basically that we can, I've got a space called, I don't know, you're probably familiar with it, the wonder.me platform, but it's they got the user interface piece of it right. I mean, it's just like very fluid. You can move in and out of circles, which opens up like a room. And they've actually just matured into being more of a viable product. They're really looking to enable remote teams and things.
This is the virtual event platform, or at least that's what it was pitched as, right?
Yeah, and so I'm looking to use that for happening hours for the holidays. So you don't have to plan your holiday party, just come join this group and we can all have a holiday party together. That's kind of the concept that I have. But so I'll have some things, but yeah, as I said, it's I had posted a couple weeks ago, but I use a product called OneSub, which is like my free time manager thing. So what I wanted to do is get people to identify 3 times that would work for them during that last 2 weeks of the year, and then I can use that to seed some doodle polls and stuff. So that's my project in a nutshell, and I'll look to get that going here.
Thanks, Carl. And you'll send that to the OGM Google group?
Yeah.
Cool.
And yeah, I mean, we got major, well, it's amazing that we can still have hope today after all the all the stuff that's been going on. So with that, I'll keep other things for non-recording.
Thanks, Carl. Did Pete find the right URL? onesub.io?
Let's see. Actually.
And in the meantime, let's go Eric Doug B. Gill.
Hi, everybody. The topic of death was brought up earlier, and I recently had a close friend who passed away, and I've been going through a grieving process in my own way. So it's a good question, like how should people die? He suffered liver failure, and for the 2 months, he depended on everybody to help him out in the hospital and in the rehab. And that's a strain on family and friends. And then just getting his family to be contacted was a challenge. So, yeah, I mean, we're only here, like Shakespeare says, our little time on the stage. And it questions like, what are we doing with our lives? So it could take in all kinds of ways. But in the end, he was in a coma for over a day. And I visited him at that time, and I saw what had become of this marvelous mind. And I played music for him. And so I had that experience. So yeah, just finding the ways to help people move on is important. There are people who specialize in that, and yeah, just putting that out there. and it's something like the possessions he had, a whole house full of stuff. And I have 4 bankers boxes of stuff from him now. It's sheet music, books, CDs, tapes, and he made reel-to-reel recordings of his music too, which I have to figure out how to get digitized somehow. So that's a 75-year life in 4 banker boxes. Yeah, my piece of it. So he's still got stuff to teach me as I look through those books, listen to his music and stuff. So I'm posting a link of an exhibit I did this past weekend at a computer museum that has a lot of vintage technology. So one of the items from him is being donated to that computer museum. It's a 1985 laptop, which looks like a lunchbox.
Which I'd never heard of. Very cool. It's a Zenith?
Yeah, Zenith lunchbox laptop. It's really cool. Yeah, so yeah, just where do we go from here? I mean, always look forward and one day at a time, just figuring out where I'm going now. So thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Eric. Thanks a lot. Doug, please.
Yeah, I hope it was clear when I brought up the issue of death that I didn't mean natural death, but death accelerated by climate change, whether it's making spaces unlivable, migration wars, and all the other ways. And I think it's sort of on our minds, and we might as well talk about it.
Like the opening scenes of Ministry for the Future.
Yes.
Absolutely. And nobody's jumping into that gap, so I'll go back to the queue for a moment.
It reminds me, Klaus isn't here today, but he says pretty clearly, and he should know, that we're going to have crop failures soon, like next year. So along with, migration and, it's not going to be comfortable where you live, it may get to you can't eat and you can't drink, and your kids can't eat and your kids can't drink. It's a bad way to die.
And humans are very adaptable and we work our way through a lot of stuff. So I'm wondering what sorts of adaptations will let us skirt some of those disasters and what sorts of adaptations are going to fail altogether.
Well, let some of us skirt some of those disasters.
And some people will afford their way out of it, which is sort of
heavy is coming. And despite what I think Doug C. maybe said about the urgency that we're hearing from COP27 as being really different from the urgency at COP26, it's still nowhere near grappling with what you guys just said.
Agreed. Doug, Breitbart, Gil, Michael.
So being devoted to feeding the white wolf, I have been finding members of my tribe that are devoted to how humans can do humans better when co-creating. And I found just this awesome thing called Winfinity, which I think some of you have crossed paths with, but it was new for me, and connected with the founder of it, who's been at it 20 years and is finally seeing momentum and traction. She can't account for it, but she appreciates Trey. And so I'm in spaces and interactions and collaborations with people that are really focused on the nature and the quality of communication and connection and collaboration experientially by and between people coming together, and doing that without inviting any of the old paradigm stuff to the party in terms of imposing on it power, control, authority, governance, structures, rules, regulations, frameworks that may or may not be required or needed for what's being created together. And then this morning, I rolled into a workshop, an hour-long workshop with a group that formed, where the magic word for them, or lightning rod for them, was ecosystem. But it was a really strange invocation, because they referred to it as an innovation ecosystem, but they basically took the word and all that it connotes and denatured it, like completely stripped it of the concept of living things and interrelationships. And so it's a shiny term boxed up in a traditional alt paradigm business, corporate, scrummy kind of context. And it's a noun. And so I rolled into this workshop, and it was this frenzied, what's the application with all the Post-its? And you can have an unlimited canvas and
Miro.
Miro. Yeah. So it was in Miro, and it was a frenetic. There was no real space or time for thinking in the way I've gotten acclimated to being indulged, to have like lots of room and space to think while doing together. And it was this driven through a process and a map and a whole bunch of preset Post-its and sort of a hamster trail to get to these punchline, ideas brainstormed out of this rapids, like driving through this process. That it was almost a culture shock at this point, because it had been so long since I'd been anywhere near any of that. And that's the norm. Like, that's where most people are living in most large companies and organizations and out there. And the 3,000-pound thing that leaped out at me is like, maybe it's just like slowing down. Maybe it's just creating, circuit breaker stops, and giving people an experience of out of that, like undesignated, uncontextualized, unframed, just like here, come here and step out of that and see whether you can feel your feet. Like literally, that's sort of what came to mind. Like, can you reconnect with who you are, like what you're feeling, what's going on for you in a space, in a moment, where you're driving your own ship and you're fully conscious and aware and awake and feel safe enough to do that. And with that, I'm complete, but that's what's living for me.
Thanks, Doug. And I'll just ask, what's your favorite path for reconnecting? There are many. There's walking in nature or sitting on the earth. There's breathing. There's a bunch of other ways one could reconnect. There's breaking bread with people and remembering that we're all human. Do you have favorite paths?
Well, I guess the top of the list for me, because I sort of see two worlds. There's the individual and not to be confused, Lara, but there's the individual narcissistic version, like me getting in touch with me and nature and whatever, but that's a solo endeavor. But I'm really drawn and attached to that with others while doing, like a fully integrated experience of co-creating with others. And but in a space that's really safe and that's not driven and that's not, run by the matrix. It's run by the people in it.
Let me push just for a second on the word safe, only in part because sometimes the places where I've been most creative or felt the most juice and co-creative energy haven't always felt completely safe because there was a little sense of danger or pressure put on the group to do something now. And there are other settings in which there was a calm created that was incredibly safe and generative as well. But I fear that in our quest for safety, we have to be sort of nuanced, because there's a form of psychological safety that's needed to show up and want to participate. But there's another sense of safety in the sense of, gosh, sometimes you need to have adrenaline pumping because things like run a little better, harder, faster. And I don't know where this goes, but thoughts?
I don't think that's an or. I think it's a different facet. And there's a slider from really slow, sleepy, lazy river and rapids. That's a dimension, and I don't have any judgment about that. Both can be really effective in their differences and meaningful and valuable. The safety piece for me is more about that. Fear is such a pervasive, ubiquitous, underlying presence today in everything. And safety in the multiple ways that can manifest for an array of individuals, but safety from the standpoint of people being able to reconnect with their own voice, agency, authority, and step into and participate and contribute without overhanging legacy imprinted things to be afraid of. And so the safety in that context, it doesn't map to the sort of experiential design, the pace, the nature of those arcs and dynamics, as much as just the openness of the invitation and the sensitivity and awareness of the way people are going about it, so that nobody's silenced, intimidated, or driven to leave because they just don't feel like it's a good idea for them to take a risk or take a chance or contribute or open their mouth.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Doug. John?
Yeah, just to follow up on that, great comments. From a lot of groups that I participated in, where the safety issue was raised and the safety issue was addressed and managed through a lot of group work and process work. And in integrating Jerry's comment about you don't want to be too safe because you'll go to sleep. The formula might be, it's just a simplification, is I feel completely safe with the people I'm in this lifeboat with. I'm safe about my peer, the people who we're trying to work together. We together are not safe. We together have a big challenge, and we better get going on it or we'll be in trouble. So a little bit of a simplistic formula, but maybe that'll be helpful. Okay.
Thank you. Thank you. That really helps. Talara, please.
Sorry, I needed a moment to unmute. As a woman in this group, and I don't know if Stacy's listening, I am curious if the men have any idea of what it's like to not be a male in a male body on this planet and what safety means.
I think some of us have thought about it a bunch. I think none of us can have that experience because we haven't been there.
And it's not a thought thing, it's
right.
a felt thing.
Right. One of the things I love about online spaces, way back in the day, when the first online avatars and all that showed up, and people could pick roles, I kind of really liked that, because there'd be a lot of bros who would adopt a female persona and suddenly get a virtual experience of what that might be like, which maybe a stereoscopic Zuckerberg metaverse world will do a better simulation of it. But just the simplicity of that, and the fact that men kind of unwittingly walking in women's virtual shoes for a short period of time and experiencing that, I think was profound for a bunch of people. But I've not seen any studies on this. Go ahead, Laura. You're muted again.
That's a micro experience, because just listening to this conversation at a somatic level, how you guys are firing out quick ideas from the intellect, which I love, is not the same as a place for resonance for us all to be expected, to be included, and for all of us to thrive in. And that quick firing, when I'm in an intellectual environment, often reminds me of a rape, because it's all about speed and time. And when I talk to First Nations people, they talk about how Robert's Rules of Order is actually the tool of the undoing of democracy, because it is such a bully tool that the needs of all can't possibly be brought in, because you can run it well, but most of us don't. How we've learned to use Robert's Rules of Order is a tool of violence in the most part. And this is not about making men wrong. This is about us realizing what we've normalized as a society and why we've gotten to a place where imminent death is upon us because of environmental issues. It's all interrelated. And this isn't about blame. It's about, wow, how can we slow these reactions down and get into relationship with others so that we can build a better future?
Thank you, Talara. And you're
Thank
bringing
you.
up topics we've touched in the past and issues that I ponder and don't solve well. And I'd love to pass the mic to Ken, who I think has something to say about it. Oh yeah, you're muted.
Well, I'd like to share my screen for a second, if I could.
Please do.
So this question was posed to women and men of
You're not sharing yet.
I'm not sharing yet. The question was posed to women and men of, what do you think about when it comes to safety when you leave the house? And here's the answers. Men in the left column. I don't think about it at all. Here's what women say. This was really potent for me to look at. And my wife is constantly telling me, men have no idea, you just don't know what it's like to be a woman and to walk out of your house and not know if you're going to get back safely or not. It's always on her mind, and I think the mind of a lot of women, especially as we look at the increased environment for violence now. So this is just really sobering, because as a man, I don't think about these things. I in some instances, if I'm in a bad neighborhood, I'm thinking about it, but mostly I walk around the world like I'm totally safe and fine. And I know women who do not ever have that feeling. And Umberto Maturana talks about the impetus for most people until very recently was to make the world safe so that you could bring harmless, naked, tasty to predator babies into the world and raise them up to be adults without their dying. And so love was the organizing principle for society until very recently. And we've gotten away from that. And I'd like us to get back to that. I'll stop sharing and shut up.
Good, thank you. One of my favorite sayings on this topic, and it cuts into many other topics, is the privilege of privilege is not noticing the privilege. When walking down the street, I don't often cross to the other sidewalk because somebody looks suspicious coming down, or when in a store, I don't worry that our guard is going to shadow me or whatever else. There's so many different ways that we don't notice the privilege. Doug?
Yeah, I think we've all thought about this. Practicing psychotherapy for 25 years, where half the clients were women, I got the privilege of experiencing some of this, so I can imagine it. The idea of your body being the target of the world constantly is an amazing experience. That the world wants to make you pregnant without asking your opinion. And that's a constant feeling. So the vulnerability is something we carry. But for the men, being the arrow in the story, that's also real and human. And what we need to do is to find ways not of suppressing one or the other, but of how to integrate them into a livable culture where men can be men, women can be women, and people are not so afraid.
Thanks, Doug. And I'm going to ask a question of the group seeking wisdom to answer the question Lara put in front of us, which is, and it's personal for me, it's like, what can I do to run these calls in a different way to create the spaces that Lara is talking about? Because there is a bit of the death march to it, like, hey, we're in here, let's share what we know, let's do it quickly, let's go through. And to some of us that feels like efficiency and fun sharing of stuff that we know, and in that sense a revelation of whatever's inside our brains, and sort of touches our hearts, although we don't go into the heart matter that much that often, and every now and then we do. And when we hit those spaces, it feels great. But I'm not a good enough facilitator to take us into those places more intentionally, more frequently, more consciously. So all suggestions welcome, including after this call is over. One thing I use now and then is silence. I don't do it that often here in our calls, but if I'm facilitating a meeting in person, I will take the group into silence pretty often. Another thing I'll do sometimes that has little to do here, but I'll ask people who've contributed a lot to step back. Gil, go ahead. You want a timeout?
No, I wanted to ask you to step back.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, because you asked a very interesting question, and it was met with some silence.
And I was talking kind of to fill the space until someone gestured.
Right, and I would have liked you to just stay with the silence until someone gestured.
Sounds great.
Which is often a very, it both gives room to people who aren't quick. It also lets something develop, which might be a discomfort. I mean, you've done this as a facilitator in a room. We're allowing a discomfort to happen that can give rise to something else. So I think you're a very good facilitator, and I would invite us to start with simply having more pauses. You know, have a longer pause between when one person speaks and the next person speaks. That might be just a simple move to make at the start, and there's no doubt others. But yeah, the rush to jump in is great and has consequences.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Please restate the question.
My question is, what could I do better, or what could I understand better and implement better to bring us into the spaces that Lara described more frequently and more intentionally?
I would suggest recasting that to what can we do? And Jerry, certainly you're shepherding us and helping us, but
I was trying to make it really specific so that we could sort of grab one brick in the face of the building and sort of address that. But I'm clearly fishing for we.
I think that's the wrong place to be specific.
Okay.
It's definitely a we thing.
Lara, please.
I believe it's an evolutionary process. And in a male-dominated world, we like to tick our boxes and say we did it. So I appreciate, Jerry, you saying I want one specific thing so I can begin this. But it is absolutely an evolutionary process. And there is when one makes the mind shift to want to include others, and you get committed to that, you start learning skills on how to do that. And the world that we have all grown up in was the opposite of that. It was about get to the destination, achieve the goal. There's a book called Ruined by Rewards, and how our schooling system actually causes this problem, because we go for the rewards as opposed to the sense of collective well-being. And this is probably illegal here. But because it's part of the conversation, my husband and Ken Homer, who's sitting here, are working on a course that will help people develop the personal skills to bring this level of embodiment. And you all have beautiful intellects and skills, and it wouldn't take much for you just to polish that up with a few key pieces to have the tools to polish. And as we grow this as a normalization, like a small group of brilliant men like you guys, taking this on as something you want to add to your existing skills, that is how we're going to grow this, because that's the leadership, the masculine having the courage to take this on in a new way is the turning point of our society right now.
Two small comments on what you just said, Talara. First, I'm not looking for one answer to implement. I'm actually looking for broad advice, mindset shifts, subtle things, exercises I might stop and run now and then, a wild, crazy sort of routine of that. And then second, I think I'm doing a lot of things to try to include others. I know that the dynamics of these conversations aren't inclusive in the way you just described, but I know that I have a lot of facilitator stuff that I do on purpose that tries to bring in the people who I notice are not participating or who seem like they have something to say but are not saying whatever. And I do a lot of that. So let me go quiet again just to see what else we have. Eric, I'm not sure what April would do, and I hate to say this, I am likely a better facilitator than April is at this point because I have just done so much more of it. And Talara, the book was punished by rewards, which is terrible for me to say because I Googled it as you were saying it instead of sitting patiently and listening to you. And it's an example of what we're talking about here. So
I think one thing you could do, Jerry, one thing you could do is there have been a lot of women that have been on these calls over the couple of years we've been doing them who are no longer here. So you could contact them and say, hey, I noticed that you were here for a while, now you're not. Is there some reason you left? Was there something we did or weren't doing? What would make it attractive to you? Because we've spoken so many times on these calls about how we're male dominated and mostly gray haired or no hair or whatever the case may be, follically challenged. But there have been a lot of women that have shown up for a call or two that I would love to see again, and they're not here. So if we just let them go, we don't know why they left. So doing a little digging of saying, what would make this attractive to you might be a way to start to help us all create that more inclusive space.
And Doug B brought Winfinity into the room today, and Trey was on multiple calls early on. So was Parmjit, who's been working with her. Love them both, and they've gone off to do Winfinity. And I'm like, bless them. And if they come back to us and say, here's how OGM might be able to put turbo boosters on Winfinity, can you help us in this way? I'm totally up and game, and I don't want to interrupt their decisions to do that instead of this. But yes, I totally get that. Doug, then Pete, then Doug B. So Doug C first.
I think that many of us have had the experience of that follows from our age of being in groups that are mixed sex where we're invisible. I know women have that, older women have that experience a lot. And whether just here, we're not, and I'm reaching for a hypothesis, that we are not the relevant age for female anticipation. Anyway, just a thought.
What's that mean, Doug?
Yeah, I'm not sure I understood that either.
The last.
Yeah, the grammar was a little weird. That we older guys are not of biological interest to the women.
So.
And how does that play?
So then the women don't stay because they don't make the connection.
I think the suggestion of Jerry talking to people who've been here and left is going to be more useful than our speculations about why they left.
Well, it certainly would be good to do that.
With respect, I don't mean to step on what you said, but that's, yeah.
Well, let's go to Pete, then Doug.
I want to appreciate the intent behind Ken's suggestion. Ken, thank you. And I also want to caution us, that's the kind of thing where you're asking somebody to do a lot of work on your behalf without necessarily a lot of reward. It's a failure mode to go to somebody and say, hey, why won't you play with me? I think you can enter those conversations, but you have to do it, I think, with a lot of compassion for why they might have left that you kind of don't own the answer to. And with first a request, hey, do you mind helping me out? Hey, can I ask you something personal about why you know, without any, without any judgment or expectation that they're going to say, oh yeah, sure, I want to help. So this is one of the things I've kind of picked up as an ally for women or for disadvantaged through race or whatever. It's like, it's really easy for white men to go, you owe me an answer. I mean, we wouldn't say it that way, but you owe me an answer for why, you won't play with me. It's like, no, dude, I do not. And so I know some of the women who've been here. An observation that I have is many of the women who come through here say, I really enjoy this conversation, and it's just kind of not for me. I want to relate the sensitive parts of me. I won't say feminine. The sensitive parts of me would have a really hard time answering that question. It's like, I don't know. It just wasn't. It wasn't fun, or there weren't enough people like me, or we didn't talk the way I like to talk. And this it reminds me the ally stuff that I've read. It's like the right answer to that is, when somebody says, can you teach me how to be better to my Black friends? It's like, dude, that's on you. That's your work. You go figure it out. I'm not your, I'm not on the hook for that. You are, and you're trying to take an easy way to get the answer. I do not owe that to you. You go figure it out and come to me when you're ready to be more compassionate, more caring, more about let's us do stuff and not, can you just tell me what's wrong? So I know many of the men, probably most of the men here are compassionate and aren't the kind of smash and grab, I just want to know what's wrong. Can you just tell me what's wrong? Kind of folks. We've all grown up past that pretty much. But I also want to caution us not to get into that pattern, and to treat the people who could help guide us into that with a lot of respect and a lot of let's rebalance it. And I'm coming to you very humbly, and I care about what you care about, and I want to have this be a partnership where I'm contributing as much to our global understanding as you are. Not, I want to come in and smash and grab, take an understanding, and not be part of, not be in interrelationship with you. Thanks.
Thanks, Pete. A tiny thing before I go to Doug. If Trey and Parmjit met in OGM and bonded and went off to go do infinity better and more, that's a win for me.
Dre got knocked off.
Wow.
And Stacy took over. Go, Stacy.
Yeah. So I don't know why, but my Zoom.
You left on a win, Jerry.
If win, is that what you got?
You said that's a win for me, and you were gone. Like,
and
I think
Stacy
that was
mic
my
drop.
version.
Exactly.
That was my computer's version of a mic drop. I've been having this very weird thing where my Zoom slow. I've got a new M1 MacBook Pro, and my Zoom in these kinds of calls starts to slow down. And when I start switching between apps, it takes like a second, and it's very disconcerting, and I can't troubleshoot it. I've looked at the network monitor and the CPU usage. I don't know what's happening, and I was like, at some moment my Zoom's going to crash, and then there we go.
I had that with my M1 Mac, and it had something to do with recording or something like that. I forget what. Make sure you update your Zoom.
My Zoom, I yesterday latest version. So I'm on latest version of OS apps, the whole thing. So it's not that, it's something else funky that's messing with my Both brains.
The brain, I was just gonna say, because the brain 13, I think, actually has some things where they're tweaking it to the M chip.
Oh, interesting. So maybe it's eating a lot of memory or
Yeah,
something?
looked up.
Because
Might
I'm on the
need to
latest
look
version
at
of
upgrading to the brain 13.
I'm on 13. I'm on the very
Oh,
latest.
you are? Okay.
I'm on the very latest rev.
Okay.
Let's back to our regular thread, which was fascinating, which I interrupted brutally with a Zoom crash. Luckily, I had my harness on and airbags in the Zoom room, so I'm not harmed. Doug, off to you.
Yeah, so I've actually been on this tip for quite a while and have some of these conversations. And so for, Talara, I think you really sort of, said it before, which is it's a shift in consciousness. And for me, that actually came about from a video that was done of a younger Obama on a book tour. And he was reading from a chapter in one of his books about sort of when he discovered he was Black and what that meant, which didn't happen until like college for him. And in his reading of that, it sort of brought, in Living Technicolor, the Black Lives Matter, the Black Lives Matter movement alive. Like, I got it. And then I sort of, spent a bunch of time after that thinking about it and realized, well, just about every other human being that's not white and male is in that category. There isn't anybody that's not ultimately on the victim side of the patriarchy, which goes back thousands of years and is well tried. But and so Ken, my reason for asking for a copy of that that list of yours is I've invoked that list verbally, especially with like women who I coach, about, you and I are in different classes, but because they'll share a story and there will have been like a really patriarchal and obnoxious thing, and they'll almost deflect it and not, they'll mention it, but in passing, and I'll go, hold on a second, like, what that person did isn't okay. and you don't have to like tolerate or put up with that or minimize it or deflect it or be subjected to that. Like, you can begin to, recognize these microaggressions and gaslighting and stuff, and not let it be okay. And I had a conversation with Wendy McLean about this specifically from the standpoint of, that thing about a bunch of, usually, middle-aged or gray-haired white men in a room going, where'd all the women go, in groups just like this. And like, there's the politic gender level, the male-female thing. And that is just a safety. Like, is this okay? Or am I just going to be run over? And she came back with something that was just really, I think, amazingly helpful for me, which was, well, I'm not really worried about that. Like, the nature of the men that I'm hanging with are generally pretty evolved. And so there's not like an obviously overtly patriarchal crock going on, projection going on, and aggression going on. She said, it's actually on a different level, which I translate into the difference between divine feminine and divine masculine qualities. And she said, it's that I get bored. Like, I come in and it's one person after another saying, look at mine, look at mine, look at mine. And there's this growing stack of pickup sticks of each individual's possession, possessory proprietary solution for everything and value contribution. But no one's aggregating those and creating anything new. They're not birthing anything. They're not bringing new life. They're not creating new value. And if that's not there, it gets boring. Like, I'm out of there. I want to go someplace where I am, collaboratively bringing something into existence, actually, creating. And I've spent a lot of time thinking about that in terms of, divine feminine has to do with earth, it has to do with water, it has to do with nurturance and growing, the actual like birthing of things. And, the masculine element's fire and air, it's intellectual, and it's needs on an energetic level, but it's not the birthing and nurturing stuff. And so I just to share the fruits of inquiries like you're talking about making, Pete, that you were suggesting. I think a lot of those pieces are floating around, and they're operating in the liminal spaces between energy flows and dynamics of human beings being, living, co-creating together, that, in the current cultural frame, we're deaf, dumb, blind, and not in recognition of, not in awareness of, but they're there. Anyway, sorry, I didn't mean to take us to the brink here.
Thanks, Doug. I like your brinking. I appreciate what you just said. And I just wanted to jump in with a couple things. I'll lower my hand. A couple things. And what you said just kind of clicked a couple things together in my head. One was that I was sitting here thinking, gosh, Pete, I think I'm going to speak for you. But Pete and I obsessively research stuff, go Google it, look it up, put it back in, and we're like puppies, like surrounding a bunch of people who are walking out in the woods, and we're like, look, I found a squirrel. I found a squirrel. You like the squirrel? You like the squirrel? And then there's like pine cone. God damn, there's a pine cone. This is the coolest pine cone. And look, and I'm busy taking the pine cone and putting it into my little mushroom mycelial structure called the brain. So while we're on this talk, I'll just share a screen just to be really obnoxious about it. While we've been on this call, I have woven this artifact. I have made this little tapestry. I have got quotes in here about the divine feminine and the masculine. To Native Americans, Robert's Rules of Order is a tool of violence. I have it under Robert's Rules of Order, which I've got a bunch of stuff on. This is my contribution, and I've got 6 or 10 tabs open in my browser for things I'm going to go do after this call to look up and put in. And I feel like I'm doing happy, and here's the problem. This is dopamine hit for me. I am doing happy work. I'm thrilled to be in conversation with all of you. And my doing this as quickly as I can, which is a form of violence, makes me really happy. And I'm kind of addicted to it. So just putting aside the tools, desisting from the note-taking and the weaving and the sculpting is hard for me. But every now and then I do it, in particular when I'm face-to-face, because then I sit and I'm just going to listen. I'm going to shut the laptop. I'm going to listen. But here I have all these tools sitting at hand, one of which just crashed on me annoyingly. But and as my machine was slowing down and my ability to do this was getting worse, I was really unhappy. It was like, argh. But this sort of Googling and weaving and sharing. So Pete and I, and Pete, not if I'm speaking for you, like more or less, mezza. Okay. And I'd love to hear what you think. And then there's this other thing that comes in, which is I'm very interested in what does generative masculinity look like. I think that one of the major problems in our world today is that there's way too much toxic masculinity. We're busy pointing to it, but men don't have very good role models or understandings of what it would look like for yin and yang to be rebalanced in our souls, for us to do a good job stewarding and shepherding for all the different kinds of things. And I think that maybe there's a topic call for us about, hey, what does generative masculinity look like? And there's probably another topic call about, hey, what does collaboration between the masculine and the feminine look like, in particular the divine versions thereof? But stuff like that. And so, yeah, Michael's writing in the chat, it looks like, hey, look, my brain's the biggest. And I'm like, no, I'm like a puppy weaving this thing. And I wish I were weaving it with all of you. That's my goal. That's one of the reasons OGM even exists, is I wish that I was weaving this with you as we go. Pete, the floor is yours.
Thanks all for, we're at the half hour, so we're kind of in overtime. I just wanted, because Jerry opened that door a little bit, I wanted to speak into my experience of why I'm running around like a puppy hunting squirrels and pine cones. For me, it's actually it's a neurodiversity thing. So if you think of me in high school, I was super high performing, not because I tried, but just because that's the way my brain works. And the way I coped in classrooms, which seemed really, really slow to me, is either I was doing the homework before it got assigned, which I really enjoyed. So then at the end of the class, the teacher could say, "Yo, Pete, is there anything we should know about the homework you just finished?" The main thing that I would do is I would sit literally right in front of the teacher. The teacher's desk would be in front of me, and I would be butted up next to it, and I would be doodling the whole time as hard as I could, and doodling like in complicated ways, like writing in mirror, or writing vertical lines but going this way kind of, and all kinds of, or programming. I used to do programming calculators and stuff like that. And so if you think about that, this is me essentially being, anti-authority. I was breaking the rule, but since I was so high performing in the class, the teachers would look down at me and go, "Okay, I guess Pete's listening." Thank God, that whole dynamic worked back in the 70s when we were less cognizant about neurodiversity. So I have this really weird, one of the weird things I've kind of observed about things that are superpowers, or the superpower and super weakness are kind of opposite sides of the same coin. I can't pay attention very well unless I'm hyperstimulating myself in some other way. And at the same time, I am really, really good. I can stay quiet and listen contentedly without a computer in a conversation for half an hour, hour and a half, when everybody else has to have talked. I could just be chill and be listening and paying attention. But my experience of any kind of conversation is usually that it's going way too slow for me, and so I need to be doing searches in the background to keep up. So I am pleased to be in an audience of people that don't get freaked out about me posting links and stuff like that, or doing Google searches a mile a minute. It helps me pay attention, is why I'm doing it, and it is never about competing to be first. Jerry, I wanted to relate kind of into this same place. I wanted to relate, I ended up talking to one of the women who has come through and gone back out without any rancor, but it's just like, yeah, it's not my deal. This kind of meeting is not my thing. I love you all to death. I like hearing you once in a while. I'll drop in every 3 months, 6 months, 9 months, whatever, but it's not my thing. And the answer that that person would have to why don't you come back? I'm not sure. It would be more like, I'm not sure it would be more than, it's not my thing. But she said something really interesting to me, Jerry, and I love you to death, and I love that you brain. Maybe love to death is the wrong way to say that. I love you to life. And I appreciate you a lot, the way that you brain, and it fits with the, my neurodiversity as well. She said something really interesting though. She said, what it is, Pete, is that Jerry is essentially facilitating the meeting to be able to feed stuff into his brain, to curate stuff into his brain. So the a check-in meeting or even a topic meeting, in a sense, is facilitated. You're very caring and sharing and things like that, but you're facilitating it with essentially the implicit goal of making a good tapestry in the brain. And so I wonder, I was kind of fascinated by that observation, and I apologize for not having told you that in private some earlier time, and now telling you that in public, but it is what it is. And I think you and I both can handle that. But I think, hearing some of the things Talara said, I'm not sure a meeting where we're collecting pine cones for whatever reason we're doing pine cones and squirrel sightings. I'm not sure that kind of a meeting is necessarily going to be a meeting that the people who are more women brained would find interesting, whether they're men or women. You know, maybe it's just not the way it works. So I don't know. So there you go.
That's really useful, Pete. I really appreciate it. We are over time. Anybody who needs to drop off, please do. I'm grateful for your presence, and let's go to Gil and Ken.
Yeah, I realize we're over time, so thank you for staying. Boy, you know, well, just on this last thing first, I would echo the comment that Talara and I both posted in the chat that it may be a good idea to have the folks who like to knit during the meeting do that and have other people facilitate. Maybe we rotate the facilitation. Maybe we learn to have meetings that are facilitation less. We've talked a bunch before about Quaker meeting. We've talked a little bit about tribal council. There's a long history of human beings being together and speaking together in different forms, you know, that accommodate the diversity and feed something richer. I'm sorry Talara left. I wanted to thank her for being here and for revealing her full name, which I've known her for years and never knew. I want to say a few unpopular things, maybe, if I may. I don't have any commitment to this group being diverse, or to most groups that I'm in being diverse. I don't feel an obligation for hitting quantitative proportions in anything. And for me, that's often a distraction from the purpose at hand. And I hugely value diversity. And I love being in groups that are diverse, and they're enriching to me in very different ways. And, you know, I know that none of us is as smart as all of us. And so I thrive on that, you know, the open, broad. Did we lose Jerry again?
I'm here.
Oh,
Did I drop off?
oh, there you are. Okay, sorry.
I'm hiding.
Yeah. So I'm all for it, but I don't feel it as an obligation. And I do think it's interesting to know why folks do and don't hang out with us. Like Pete, I echo what you're saying. It may be just not for me. That's fine. You know, no problem with that. Gosh, really quickly, because I know over time, Doug B talked about being in a space and being in a moment. And the next phrase I wanted to hear was being in a body. And I really resonated with your observation about the facile adoption of the term ecosystem for things that are not living and not complex in the way that ecosystems are. As you know, as an ecologist by background, that one's annoyed me for a long time, because it's like sort of a blind simplification that's missing something very, and it's sort of become the, you know, ecosystem in business means a collection of stuff. Kind of not much more than that. Speaking of collections of stuff, Miro drives me absolutely crazy, as does the notion of brainstorming, which used to be fun. I'm really tired of it. People say, let's brainstorm. What they really mean is kind of let's think, let's explore, let's develop ideas together rather than just throw squirrels on the wall with Post-its. Doug talked about the climate investment and climate reducing activities, which is a really important question. But for me, it doesn't say, let's not do anything. It says, let's look at the energy return on investment or the carbon return on investment. What do we put in for what do we get out? And that will often mean to, you know, maintain and improve and rehabilitate stuff that we already have rather than tearing it down and building the newest, fanciest, most energy efficient thing. There's a nuance in there that's really important. Jerry or somebody talked about, I think Jerry, I think it was you, talked about managers and workers never getting together to talk about automation, et cetera. I'm misquoting badly here, but Mondragon does that. does that all the time, tens of thousands of people in a collection of cooperatives that are cutting edge technologically, some of the most advanced companies in Spain. And their commitment is that if your work becomes redundant because of a technological advance, there's other work for you. We have a commitment to each other. And that goes back to the question of who owns things and how do the governance structures reflect the stake, and and how do we share the value that we create together, which is why I'm doing the business move that I'm doing. There were several points in the conversation where people said, well, nobody is doing X or somebody should X. And I'm really struck by how many thousands of people around the planet are doing exactly X, but folks aren't aware of. And so there's this tendency to want to reinvent things. Ken, the Marin example you talked about before, there's stuff like that happening. And maybe the folks in Marin are aware of it or maybe not, but we need to be able to share and learn and build on what each other does, which is one of the reasons why, Jerry, your creation of brain and things like that are so valuable. This was a check-in call, right? Not a thematic call. So check-in calls are going to be kind of squirrely. And they generate lots of thematics that we want to spend time on. And the challenge is that if somebody raises a thought and we dive down that tunnel, then we don't have as much time for everybody else to check in. Here I am at the end of time, and Michael still hasn't done, and Stacy hasn't. And so, there's a challenge in the facilitation and the balance of that. For me, the quick personal check-in is, so to the sharing value thing, I'm trying to build a company that invests in employee-owned companies and grows that sector at the intersection of that sector and the climate transition. Yes, I'm checking in right now. Thank you.
You are. You sort of seized the moment and went off into your list of items that you wanted to check in with. I'll just sort of point that out.
Is that not what we're doing?
We're over time, and I was hoping to have wrapping comments. So I wasn't. I was going to you for thoughts around where we were more than the check-in, and I was wondering whether or not Michael would get to check in. But
let me just say two very brief things. So I'm doing that, and it's very fun moving that from concept to on the ground, actual real world conversation with businesses. I'm rediscovering long form writing finally after years of being battered and ruined by Twitter and Facebook and all that. And so I'll share a post later today about the election and things. And I'm fascinated that there hasn't been a word about Twitter and Mastodon in this whole conversation.
I'm sort of relieved about that, but thank you.
I'm not unhappy. I'm just fascinated. It's surprising this bunch.
Thank you. Thanks, Gil. Ken, Michael, then we'll wrap the call. And Michael, go ahead.
I was going to say, I understand Mastodon is a mammoth undertaking, but that's another thing entirely. Kind
of fuzzy on that whole thing.
I'll be very brief. I just want to say, if I was unskillful earlier when I spoke, I was not suggesting that men put themselves in a position of going to women and saying, "Tell us what to do." I was saying, Jerry could say, I noticed you were previously on calls. You're not here. Is there something we did? Is there something would make this more attractive? And totally fine if they say it's just not my thing. I don't know how, if we don't ask women to get the understanding of what they would need here. So it puts us in a little bit of a bind of, I understand as a white person, I need to do my own work before I go and talk to Black people. As a man, I think I've done my work to talk to women, but maybe I haven't. So I just wanted to clarify that I was not suggesting that it be that we're demanding an answer. I did not intend that at all. And if that came through, I apologize. That wasn't my intention. So done.
Hey, thanks, Ken. I appreciate that. And I have the intuition that we need to do more work. I'm not even sure I could explain that, but the amount of work that is just by asking the question, it can be a lot of, and Gil, I'm sensitive to your tutelage about language, but just asking the question can be really affrontative. And then having, and I can say some of this because I have some of the same thing. I'm not a woman, and I don't have, I'm not oppressed in the way that women are oppressed, but I have a sensitivity neurodiverse sensitivity that makes it really hard for me to even hear a question, because if I don't want to give you an answer, I feel compelled to give you an answer anyway. And that's, like a lot, like all of a sudden I just did a lot more work that I did not want to, and you made me do it. And, and to put somebody else in that position makes me really uncomfortable. So I know that there are women. Grace is an example of somebody I'm pretty sure we could go to and say, yo, what's up, dude? And she would just give you an answer, or she would say, go F yourself.
May not want to say
care to give an
dude,
answer.
just a FYI.
Well, so a lot of the women, especially the younger women I know, are using dude, and I feel really ashamed when I'm calling them dude. But if I don't do that, I'm actually like calling myself out as anyway.
It's complicated.
It is complicated.
Yeah, I have the intuition that we could do more work first, and I would want to do that.
Thank you, Pete. Michael, everybody who's here is here of their own free volition. Feel free to check in. I have another person who will join this call at the top of the hour, which is my next planned call. He will be amused to discover this group. In fact, this group might really enjoy him. Is John Underkoffler, who's the inventor of the interface that Tom Cruise uses in Minority Report. But that is my only constraint right now. Please, the floor is yours. And I'm sorry I put you at the end of the queue today.
Okay. Is he as ashamed of his contribution to Minority Report as Jared Lanier is his?
I don't think that he and Sharon are like even on the same orbit in the same planetary system in some way. It's interesting.
Well, my check-in was going to be something else, but I do want to react a little bit to the conversation, the turn the conversation took at, I think, Tylera's initiation, and a lot of what I've heard about this group and the way that we are and our role and our inclusivity or lack thereof and what we have to offer. And while, I wouldn't compare it to the experience of being a woman in this group, I do feel peripheral in this group. Other than, my familiarity, I don't feel the gift at holding forth that, most of the people I see on my screen right now, do, and some of the regulars who've already left or been here, even a couple of them women. Like, I think Grace feels more at home holding forth than I do. But, being in a space where you're peripheral, which is, I know, a common experience for non-straight white males of, a certain age, is, when Winfinity came up and the idea that Trey and I don't remember the other name,
Parmjit,
what had been here and now weren't. I feel like when you come here and offer your willingness to be on the periphery of this group, which I feel like I do, and I get what I get from it, I don't expect people, I don't think this is a welcoming place for people to come truly participate. I feel comfortable enough to be on the periphery, and then I also go to other groups that don't look like this group where I am on the periphery, and I don't wade into holding forth because I'm not necessarily welcome to, and they're younger groups, groups in which I'm in the minority as to color or gender or sexuality or location, age, whatever. And I think about the way, you know, Jerry, you were looking to explore the way that you moderate and the way the tenor of this platform and the, you know, the way we expose the bigness of our brains is kind of there's an exhibitionist you know, nature to it, like where we're going around the room opening our raincoats and saying, oh, you think that one's big, you know, and the fact that people come in and feel like, you know, I don't really want that experience. I don't want to play that game, to me is totally unstartling. I mean, I'm sometimes feeling like I'm barely here in that way. And it's, you know, there's the big win is hold forth impressively, you know, which many people here are able to do. And the little win is quippy puppy or link bearing puppy. And, you know, and I play that game in the chat a lot and, you know, have that minor win, but it's all very quantitative. And it's funny, as we come out of the conversation about politics and how politics are covered as this quantitative stat driven sporting event that with wins and losses, as opposed to an exercise in problem solving for purpose of cooperative governance. And you know, the listening here is good if you listen, but it is built around, oh, I've got something. And Jerry, I would say that your moderation is often, you know, your contribution begins with, that reminds me of something in my brain, whether literally in the brain or, you know, something that is an interesting quippy puppy footnote to like something someone said, and that's a win for you. And you know, the plus ones in the chat are wins. And when we talk about the idea of us being able to help others, as we gather it, you know, in OGM, you know, weekly for years now, you know, what can we do to help others, like Winfinity or whatever? I don't think we're in a position to help others, however generous we feel. And I feel like we're like, I mean, I'd rephrase it by saying we are actively failing to position ourselves in a way that could be supportive. You know, we've created sort of a safe cave for us and this way of being, but it's not really, I mean, I come here and I enjoy it and I love you all and I learn, but we're not proactively doing anything by being here, and we're taking our own time imagining that by being here we're leading, when we'd be more contributive and supportive if we were out there following groups that don't look like us and learning about them. And Ken, there was something that you said about like, I feel I have to do the work before I go into the spaces with these other people. And I feel like going into spaces with other people is doing the work and listening and not speaking. And maybe that, you know, results down the line in this room looking different, but inviting people into this room doesn't work. So yeah, that's not my check-in, but I'll skip my check-in for this time.
Michael, that was really good and useful and lovely, and I really appreciate what you said. And several things you said puzzled me, like the idea of a big win in OGM, and I realized I have to set myself out of myself to see what you said, to even see it, because to me, anybody lurking here is a win. Like anybody who chooses to spend an hour with us and even just listen and maybe walk away, and hopefully they chose to be here in OGM because every now and then they walk away with a shiny nugget that's useful to them.
But Jerry, I mean, that's a win because you have expanded. I don't mean to be, sounds harsh and cynical, but you know, you've expanded the audience of followers that this is for all of us, but you know, most particularly, of course, for you, since you host it and are most associated with it. And I feel like, you know, we win. I don't, you know, I mean, I say repetitive things, you know, we all say repetitive things, and you know, Klaus, I kind of know what Klaus is going to say before he starts talking in general, and you know, Doug C and you know, different people in different ways, and I don't mean to say that like disparagingly. It's rich and it's good, and you know, giving people the little goodies that they can walk away from here with and hopefully come back doesn't seem expansive. I don't know. I mean, it's obviously a good enough thing that I'm here. I'm questioning some dynamics of it.
Plenty in a very useful way, and I'm sorry that we're sort of like, I'm going to run out of time shortly, although when John joins I'm just going to ask him to join this conversation and see what happens. But so there are lots of things in my head from what you said, and it could be that who shows up here is merely an artifact of me and what I'm doing and what I instigate in the group, and that's sort of it. And that would be sad for me, because that means that is not appealing to women, people of color, et cetera, and that could be a lesson I walk away with. So for me, this is a sense-making exercise. And in this series of calls, which I kind of instigated at the beginning of lockdown, I'm kind of the head instigator. And I feel like when I say, hey, that reminds me of, or what do you think about, I'm trying to make sense with all of us, whatever it is that we're chewing on, and I'm throwing on the table my own personal, quirky, often perspective, and hoping that anyone else in the crowd who feels like it will step up and go, yeah, but that's kind of wrong, or I think, you know, I saw this, and what about that? And when we sort of lay these pieces next to each other and something starts to emerge, I get this wonderful sense of construction in the conversation. And then, as I kind of just described, in the meantime, I'm busy squirreling away, trying to build a larger, longer lasting artifact out of all these arguments and different little pieces, little shiny bits of diamond. I'm trying to sort of put them into something to build something that might be useful later. And I don't even know at what scale or to whom, but I know that there are art brute primitive artists out there who make dioramas out of used toothpicks of the Bay Area, and I'm not doing that. And I feel like me scrolling stuff away in this very weird brain thing is far more civilizationally useful than building a diorama of the Bay Area. And that's my quirk. And so there's a lot of my quirks that are in here that are part of it. And I realize that there's this kind of weird seeming competitive, oh my God, I found it first kind of thing. And Pete and I are sort of the people out on the van of that. And maybe that's just a piece of what this call is, because I love Quaker Meeting and I would go to Quaker Meeting to get Quaker Meeting. And maybe we need a trigger warning that says, hey, in this room, everybody's welcome, and you're welcome to just step in and step out like Quaker Meeting or like Open Space. But the general thing here is going to be sort of fast paced, and every now and then we'll change the speed knob and we'll slow things down and go into silence or whatever else. And maybe that's just the nature or format of these calls and what we do. I don't know.
I think they're different calls. I think
What are different calls?
what it looks like to me is and I can see this more clearly because of this conversation. Thank you. What it seems like to me is, especially you and I, but the collected folks who like to come to these calls, we like these kind of calls. And this speeding up and slowing down, that's probably a good thing to do. But this kind of call is not a call for most people. Probably many men, probably many women. And I don't even know if men and women is the right way to slice and dice the people who would like this call or wouldn't like this call. It's a particular kind of call, and it's just not for everybody. So separately, now for me, OGM has, and kind of like what Gil said, I don't feel an obligation to make this call diverse. I do feel a strong obligation to have diversity in the world and to have more fairness, and for us to fight for more fairness for everybody. I'm pretty sure that's not this call. And I'm pretty sure that this call isn't all of what OGM says it wants to be. So if OGM wants to be a diverse, welcoming place, this is the wrong frickin' kind of call to have. It's just blindingly obvious to me at this point. It's just, this is a kind of call where, it goes fast and certain people like it and certain people don't. If we want to have a diverse call with a lot of inclusion, a lot of turn taking, saying that, oh, we'll turn take sometimes in this call ain't gonna cut it. You need a different kind of call where the squirrel exclamations and pinecone collecting and stuff like that probably takes a back seat. And the call is run differently with more participation and roundtable. And it would be, I think I could cope with that kind of call, but my accommodation would be much different. I would go into, the kind of space that Michael was talking about. There are spaces where I'm quiet for most of the time, and I'm not posting links, and I'm listening and watching to people's faces, and that's the activity that I want to do in that kind of call. My take.
Thanks, Pete. Carl?
Yeah, it's just amazing. I mean, this is the timing of things too. This is exactly the kind of thing, but like the ideas I have, I think that Wonder platform that was kind of talking about, I mean, they have it, you can break it. They have circles as the, like for, it's the rooms, and you can have anywhere from 2 to 14 people, and there's research that says don't make it, a group can't be larger than 14. I have to track that down. I did and stuff, but it's intriguing. But I mean, it's such a fluid thing that we could really test out different facilitation processes and what kind of meetings, and you could get a feel for which, here's A, B, and C, which one resonates the most with you or whatever, and we could actually be testing some of the different facilitation. That's just one possible type of thing, but I mean, my idea is basically just to have it be complete. Basically people can come in and just like invite friends, and they can break off and have their own little holiday party, and then come back out and mingle with people. But it's doing some proof of concepts, and I really see OGM as being kind of of all the communities I'm part of. I see OGM as kind of being the core, and we've had these kind of things like we want to do different things, but I think there's so I think that this can give a platform to to experiment with some different things. And then I do have I've been paying for Team Brain licenses for a while. I'm not using them, very underutilized. So I have some things so we could have, in fact, I could do a screen share and show you. I'm doing this, I'm doing my own Jerry thing here too.
Cool.
And things, but yeah, as I said, and then obviously in the last 2 weeks, and then so other parts of it are is like, what are we gonna do in FY, or in calendar year 2023. And I've kind of been joking, and Doug knows this, about this has been the year of resolving catch-22s and things. So just maybe have that, like, what have we resolved? What are our challenges we see us working on, and not getting into resolutions, because the January 7th, Betty White would love this because her birthday is January 17th, and you get the despair calendar. January 17th is International Resolution Abandonment Day and stuff.
Makes sense.
But then every day is just first day one of a new year. They're just overlapping or whatever. So, okay, well, with that, I'll let it go. But for the week here, but just a great conversation, and it's and this whole sense of just that we're on a resonating frequency or whatever. This is definitely a little tribe, and as Gil is saying, I mean, we have our tribe, and it's like we're engaged for 90 minutes a week in this and space, and then what are we doing the other 166 hours?
Yeah. Thanks, Carl. And I went and looked, and John hasn't sent me a oops, missed the call thing, so I'm going to ping him in a little bit to see what's up. Any wrapping thoughts?
I just want to, I relate to OGM and the OGMs out there, like all of the variations on the theme, as, each is its own unique phenomenology, its own unique expression, manifestation, fruits of all the people that are in it. And whoever put the stake in the ground always has a sort of disproportionate weight, because it's in the nature of the beast. And what's also growing for me is there are these casting dimensions of who's really good for what. Like, there are engineering folks, and you drop them into an OGM float and they go out of their minds, their heads explode. And something you design for engineering people, and you get, the kumbaya person drops into it, and it's like, wait, what about? And everybody goes, no, like, train's got to run on time. We've got a job to do, blah, blah, blah. And part of all of that evokes for me sensing into what's really needed, in terms of there's a group of people and they're flowing, and somebody's triggered, or there's a reaction, or there's a pull to branch. And the layer of signaling those things, and all of them being okay, like so-and-so and so-and-so just split to go off to here to dig into that. And it's not a comment on the larger room they left behind, and it's not a judgment one of another, etc. But the reality is, from moment to moment, squirrel, right? Like, what's got my attention or generating pull, or what do I want now, which is different than what I want from 5 minutes from now, times however many people end up in a room. And there's this tendency to silo. There's a tendency to bring a lot of expectations and judgments. And if all that stuff is let go of, how's about just really feeling into what's needed to nourish and to feed and support the way things want to roll and express themselves as they go. And like looking at that, digging into that in a more generative way, might reveal some really interesting needs. You know, like signaling needs, which is what I'm missing in these conversations. Like, I wish there were a row of buttons across the top, where people could signal things and or people could inquire, you know, to indicate that they've got an inquiry, they've got something living and energized, that they have the ability to share with everybody, like, so everybody else knows that person is whatever. I feel like there's a layer missing. But other than that, I'm sort of like Gil, I'm agnostic about what anyone is. I don't have any judgments about whether things are missing or not, how open, how this, how that, vibe-wise. Things are the way they are. And, you know, the vote with your feet. Like, if it's not for me, that's okay. I leave. And yeah, but I really appreciate this. I appreciate actually both of you, Jerry and Pete, for living in the space you live in and being who you are and doing what you're doing. And I have actually had sort of niggling at the back of my mind, okay, Jerry, maybe it's for somebody else to figure out how to put wheels on your brain. And I've been thinking about that more and more, like, and that's sort of what I do for a living for a lot of other people. So, and I think there is something to doing that, figuring out how to do that, but in a different way. Not in the old paradigm way.
Yeah.
But in a live plug and play interactive way.
Totally
so anyway.
Thanks, Doug. And that opens a really interesting conversation for me. We can have some other time.
Would be welcome to do that. Love to do that.
Ken, did you want to jump in?
Yeah, I thought to shift us on the way out that I would tell the Microsoft joke if people would like to hear that. It's a joke about Bill Gates. So Bill Gates unexpectedly dies and he gets to heaven and St. Peter goes, Bill, kind of wasn't expecting you, but let me look here. Let's see. You know what? You've done so much good and so much bad that we're going to give you a choice. So let me show you around heaven. And, you know, it's all silvery and there's guys with wings and playing harps and it's very sedate and, you know, it's not very exciting. And so they get in the elevator, they go down to hell and it's a freaking party going on, you know, and Satan's there with champagne and he's toasting people and they're all having a great time. There's music and dancing and orgies and he says, so what do you want to do? He says, well, you know, if it's all the same to you, I think I'll stay here in hell. And so he says, so be it. St. Peter gets in the elevator, goes back up. 6 months goes by and St. Peter's got a slow day. He goes, I think I'll go visit my friend Bill Gates in hell. And he gets out of the elevator and the first thing he sees is this pillar of fire and Bill Gates is chained to a pillar of fire and there's crows pecking his eyes out. And he goes, St. Peter, this is terrible. Why didn't you tell me what it's going to be like? It's nothing like what I saw when I came down here. And St. Peter goes, Bill, that was a demo. Anyway,
thank you. That's lovely.
That's what happens when you introduce Windows 95 to the world.
It is.
Not even our announcement dates are.
Exactly.
Paper, right?
Exactly.
Anyway, I thought we could just go out on a humorous note here. So
I appreciate that.
Lovely to see you all. Thanks. A really great conversation. I appreciate everything that came up here. And wish you all the best for a great week and see you next week.
Same here.
Absolutely.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye for now.
See you.